Good afternoon, and welcome to our webinar, AI Use Cases and Case Studies for Commercial Insurance. Today we are joined from IntellectSeek by Jim McKinney, Chief Strategy Officer and Products Business Head, and Lila Bean, Chief Customer Officer and Head of Consulting. We also have Jeff Goldberg, Executive Vice President of Research and Consulting at Novarica. This is the first in a two-part webinar series IntellectSeek is hosting with Novarica that discusses considerations to take when adopting AI in your commercial insurance operations. Just a few notes before we get started. Please post any questions you have during the webinar in the questions panel. We will have time at the end of the session for Q&A where we will address these questions. There will also be a few poll questions throughout the session. Make sure you answer honestly. So now that we have all of this housekeeping out of the way, let's get started. Jeff, I will let you get us going.
Great, thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure working with IntellectSeek and a pleasure talking about AI. So I'm Jeff Goldberg. I'm the EVP of Research and Consulting with Novarica. And I guess on the next slide, brief overview of who Novarica is. We are a strategy advisory firm focusing on insurance technology and operations. I'm not going to go into a Novarica pitch, but I think the key thing here is there's a few slides in my presentation where I talk about what insurers are doing in the space. We work with over 150 insurer clients and over 350 insurers who are part of our technology council, and that's where this information is coming from. It's from conversations and surveys that we do with the insurance industry. It helps us get an idea of what is and what is not going on with AI. Next slide, please. Before we get into the what's happening, I want to talk about what AI is. And so in today's presentation, I'm going to cover a few different areas. What is AI? What does it really mean? How is it important to the insurance industry? How are insurers adopting AI, and what does it look like right now? What's the current state? What some of the things to keep in mind when you as an insurer are starting to go down an AI journey, how that matures, what kind of solutions you should be looking for, and then finally talking about use cases specifically. And then in the next webinar that we have, I'll be getting into more deeply into some of those topics. But today we're really going to understand how AI really fits within commercial insurance and starting with what it really means. At Novarica, we break AI into 4 separate categories, though recognizing that all of these categories overlap. The first is machine learning. And to be clear, machine learning powers all 4 of these categories. But when I talk about machine learning, I'm thinking about data analytics, taking the immense amount of data the insurance industry has and doing analysis of it. So it's in some ways, when I talk about machine learning as machine learning, we're talking about that approach to data in new ways. The second is image recognition and machine vision. So the idea of looking at photos, looking at scanned documents, making sense of visual imagery in a way that computers used to be completely incapable of doing. Then there's audio and voice recognition, understanding what people are saying, how they're saying it, and text analysis. So text is actually looking at sentences, words, and understanding what their meaning is. So that is at a very high level where we put the top 4 categories of AI. Next slide, please. And so then in each of these categories, there are technology applications of AI, right? So these are the categories. Each of them is able to power something that becomes more of a functional application of the artificial intelligence space. So advanced predictive modeling, dealing with big data, dealing with the incoming streams of IoT data. On the image recognition side, you have photo and video processing. You've got self-driving cars, right? It's looking at the road, making decisions about what to do by looking at visual artifacts. And the audio recognition side, voice recognition, you've got, hey, was that a honk? Was that a screeching tire? What was that sound right before the car accident happened? We've got emotional recognition from a voice, the tone of voice, understanding, being able to interpret what someone is feeling at a high level through how they're speaking. And then a text analysis, you have natural language processing. What do words mean and in what context? Sentiment analysis, are these happy words or sad words? This powers chatbots, this powers reading forms, semantic querying, a lot of different things. And to be clear, there's overlap between these technologies. So, NLP, I'm putting it in the text analysis space, but obviously if you're listening to human speech from an audio recognition standpoint, you'll then end up interpreting that, you'll have to take what is this person saying, and the AI will have to figure out what words are being spoken, and then NLP will help understand what that person is saying, right? So you've got multiple steps going on. And now we can go to the next slide. The thing I want to recognize is that we're talking about AI today, and how commercial lines insurers can use and apply AI. But the reality is emerging technologies like AI don't exist in a vacuum. There are multiple emerging technologies that are all emerging simultaneously and frankly are powering each other. So in this limited view, I'm talking about big data, IoT, and AI together because all three of them are really connected. IoT perhaps even too narrow of a category. Really what we have is technology that allows us, well, actually starting with IoT, we've got IoT and social media and new data sources. We have essentially these new streams of data that were not accessible to us before. Then you've got big data technology, which is unstructured databases, scaling databases, technology that allows you to process that huge stream of data in a way that we wouldn't have been able to process it in the past. Doesn't work in a traditional relational database. And then finally, that's so much data that it is really too much for an individual human to just look at and understand. And that's where AI comes in. These new sources of data processed by new means of supporting this massive amount of data and this new technology to actually make sense of that data. And that's true whether you're talking about straight structured data or whether you're talking about image data, audio data, and human language. Now, on the next slide, we'll talk about, this is about the fact that these technologies don't all just magically appear fully formed in an insurance organization. It takes time to build capabilities around any of them. And I'm not going to get into the details here. And in fact, I will get into the details on the next webinar when we start talking about applying these things in the real world. But what I want to really take away from the slide is that we've thought a lot about how a typical insurance organization starts building capabilities on any one of these areas and build up that capability over time. And that's really the point here, is it matures. You don't need to necessarily be an expert in all of these at once in order to use them. You don't necessarily need to be an expert in any of them in order to start getting value from them. And you might wonder how, and that's part of what we'll talk about, but the short answer is working with partners. So now let's talk about the current state of the industry and where insurers are today. This is from Novarica's annual emerging technology study. And in this case, I have listed really all the emerging technologies that we cover. Some go in and out every year. We finally took off mobile because it was hard to say mobile was an emerging technology. Although the reality is insurers have probably not fully adopted mobile. If anything, insurers have not fully adopted the internet in terms of how they do business, but we don't put the internet on here anymore because it would be a little silly to call that emerging. And what I want you to see is how AI falls compared to other emerging technologies. We see the biggest are RPA and low code, no code, to the point where, those aren't really emerging technologies. We do think about them in those terms. AI is actually doing pretty well. We're still, in terms of actual deployment, we're still talking really only about a quarter of insurers. Before I get into the details, I have a breakout slide to actually dive into those AI numbers and think about them. I'd actually like to use this point to take a poll of the audience, specifically around these two, around the similar polls that we did with the insurers here. So could we go to the first poll question? So the question is, what is the current status of AI initiatives at your organization? You have wide deployment? Are you in a current pilot phase? Do you have a planned pilot? So it hasn't quite started, but you're building up to it. Is there definite interest, but really nothing has started yet at all? Or is there no interest? So once again, that's wide deployment, current pilot, planned pilot, definite interest, no interest. And this is about all types of AI that you might be investing. And I'm not in control of the poll, so I can't say when we're going to see the results. But all right, so so we're going to see the results, I guess, in a minute. All right, current pilot, 100%. All right, so everyone on this, it makes sense. I wasn't expecting a lot of no interest. If you're on this call, you probably have some interest, but it looks like what we're seeing is a lot of people who are piloting AI, but haven't gotten into wide deployment yet. Okay, great. So the second poll question is about those four categories that I broke things down to before. Those four categories being machine learning for data analysis, image recognition and analysis, unstructured text processing and NLP, voice and audio recognition and analysis. And the question is, I should have started with the question is, which category of AI do you consider most important for your organization? So of those four, machine learning, image, unstructured text and NLP, and voice and audio, which do you think is the most important for your organization or the insurance industry in general? Though, typically what's important for you is probably important for other people as well, though it always depends on the nuances with, what you consider your competitive differentiators, what kind of projects you've got going on. And the results, all right, oh, interesting spread. We see machine learning for data analysis and voice and audio recognition analysis with image recognition coming in after that, and then unstructured text processing and NLP falling behind, which it's not how I would have expected things to go, but all right, great. I appreciate everyone's answers. I think generally I see machine learning and unstructured text as actually the top two. So if we can go back to the presentation and go to the next slide, I'll actually break down the numbers specifically for AI. This is not obviously from the poll we just took, but for the poll, the survey that we did with insurers at the end of last year. So really, this is just a close-up view to the previous slide, so I won't spend too much time talking about it. What I really want to show here is that we're around, if you look at just who's deployed these different technologies, it's 25% or 25% or less in terms of the insurer, how far it is out there in the insurance industry. Now, it is possible if you have four things as 25%, that maybe that means 100% of insurers have done AI. That's not what's going on here. I would assume, without having 100% knowledge, that there's some overlap between the people who've done one of these areas and another, right? So some insurers have done, multiple AI projects, and others have done none. But at the same time, it does mean that someone who's invested in machine learning might not be the same person who's working with drones and image recognition or property or something else like that. So it's actually, despite the numbers being pretty low, I actually think that's a pretty decent deployment of what is a real emerging technology. I'll also say there's probably some both undercounting and overcounting going on. I think overcounting, because sometimes insurers say they're doing AI when what they're really doing is traditional predictive modeling. That's not really AI, that's data analytics. But also sometimes insurers say they're not doing AI when they're actually working with third parties, perhaps like a company like IntellectSeek, who they themselves are using AI to power a technology that the insurer leverages. So really, the insurer is making use of AI, if not building AI applications themselves. And let's talk about that. So let's go to the next slide. Actually, I'm not going to talk about that just yet. Sorry. So first, I want to talk about value in this space. In the insurance industry, there are three primary ways of creating value: selling more, managing risk better, or costing less to operate. Next slide, please. And these are pretty straightforward and simple. Although most industries have sell more and cost less to operate, the insurance industry has managed risk better. We all know that selling more insurance that's going to cause huge losses is not actually good growth. The idea here is, for everything you do from a technology perspective, you need to put it in the context of these value measurements and think about what the metrics are and the KPIs are that are going to help you understand where the value comes from. Next slide, please. The reason this is important is because AI tends to be such a technology-driven innovation opportunity. Insurers start saying, you know what, we should be thinking about AI. Or vendors come and say, you should care about AI. The fact is you shouldn't. What you should care about is value. And it's really, really important to understand how these things drive value for the organization. And when I talk about use cases after this, it's putting them all in the context of insurance industry value. So now just taking these three levers of value and putting them in, putting artificial intelligence, thinking about where artificial intelligence drives value. On the sell more side, we think about market optimization, customer 360, delinquency prediction, life event prediction. These are all use cases right here. We'll go into a little more detail, but this is the key here, is what are the actual use cases and what's the value that AI might support? If you can't come up with that, you shouldn't be investing in AI. You have to think about the value and the use case first. On the manage risk better side, AI is really obvious ones. Better risk models, right? Can we make better decisions around our risk? Severity protection, auto reserving for claims, risk factor identification that you wouldn't have had access to otherwise. And then on the cost less to operate side, intelligent RPA, document ingestion, automated decision making, right? Can we smooth processes? Can we make processes go quicker with less human involvement? And every time you're thinking about our technology, not just AI, this is where you start. Next slide, please. Before I get into the use cases themselves, what I want to talk about is how insurers are going about getting AI. And that is what I like to call purpose-built versus general purpose, right? You can go to a big horizontal technology vendor who is selling AI platforms and allow you to start doing your own AI modeling and building your own AI methodologies. Or you can license a solution that is solving a specific need for you that is powered by AI, right? What I've tried to do here, I'm actually going to go through this in detail. I think we'll go through this in more detail in the next webinar. I just wanted to lay out there the idea that you're still working with AI. So the thing is even if you're buying a purpose-built solution, let's say something that uses artificial intelligence to take a scanned document, convert it into structured text, and then do risk analysis on what the information that was gathered through that submission form, all powered by AI, but it's coming from a vendor, and the vendor's done all the artificial intelligence work, and you're using that, AI is still making your organization smarter and better, right? So even if you haven't hired AI scientists of any kind, working with purpose-built technology makes you an AI adopting organization. And like I said, I'll go into the details on the differences on the next webinar, but that's what I want to talk about now. So now let's jump into the use cases, which is the next slide. Right. So what I want to think about now is let's put this all in context, right? How do we think about artificial intelligence in use in the insurance industry across the enterprise? Every part of the insurance value chain can benefit from AI investment, right? And here I've got one example per part of the enterprise value chain. And for each example, I talk about what's the category of AI, what's the actual application of AI that's being leveraged, and what's the lever of value that's most being levered. So in product and actuarial, we've got deploying better pricing models. Actually, can we do our actuarial decision making? Can we figure out which factors are most important in pricing? Using predictive modeling powered by machine learning, helping us manage risk better. On the marketing side, we can identify underinsured areas. That's big data analytics, looking at huge sources of data to figure out where there's gaps. That's another machine learning category that's helping you sell more. On the underwriting side, we can use photo analysis to look at roof age and damage estimates from drone imagery or low-lying aircraft imagery or satellite imagery. That's a image recognition category that's helping you manage risk better. Customer service, you got virtual help desk support, chatbots, NLP, however you end up deploying that. It's using text analysis category. It's helping you cost less. And it's also possibly helping you sell more, right? All of these things overlap. I'm kind of trying to highlight the most obvious levers of value. Billing, we're talking about increased invoice processing speed. Claims, we're talking predicting severity and large loss potentials, helping you help you identify that quickly and cut them off before they blow up. Compliance, we're talking about regulatory classification and obligation extraction from the deep reading of documents and understanding what the terms mean. Do you have silent cyber risk because you haven't properly set up your policies to exclude it? Things like that. And let's go to the next slide. And this is similar, but now I'm looking at the underwriting specifically. I wanted to go through underwriting cases in commercial lines because that's the part of the topic of today's event. But also I'll show you how you can really dive into one area and identify multiple use cases. But these are also really cool use cases. Many of them are in process today, whether insurers realize it or not, because they're working with vendors being powered by artificial intelligence. We can improve inspection speed and cost through photo analysis. We can do underwriter assignment and outcome-based assignments through, and really just create automated system rules that understand and adjust to how underwriters do their best work. We can do small business data aggregation for pre-fill and risk assessment. So just going out there and pulling all the information in a way that we used to not be able to do because computers were really bad at that kind of pattern matching and data matching, and help you sell more, pre-fill, help you figure out what your risk issues are. I mentioned roof age and damage estimates already. We can talk about standardizing and accelerating your risk assessment. I think that's really critical, right? It's not just about making the smarter decisions, but actually bringing the whole organization in alignment. And identifying and addressing churn factors to improve customer retention. Can you keep your business strong by understanding what causes people to non-renew and giving them, giving attention to those accounts and making sure, one, you understand what you need to be doing so that people don't get there, and then identifying those accounts and servicing them proactively. So really, really awesome opportunities when it comes to AI for commercial lines insurance and all of insurance. And then finally, a conclusion slide. It looks like I'm a minute over, so this is good, generally the right timing. Here's my conclusion: is AI should be value and use case driven, right? This is what if there's any message you take away from this, it's thinking about how do I reframe the conversation around artificial intelligence into what are the point solutions that I can be either buying or building that solve specific use cases with specific value for my organization. Whether that's selling more, managing risk better, or costing less to operate, or some combination of all of them, and figure out what's the best way to do it. Are you building out your own AI expertise? Are you working with consultants? Are you buying packaged solutions that deliver this value to you, or some mix of all three? And when it comes to an emerging technology like AI, with so many different opportunities, it's probably a mix of all three. So thank you so much for having me on the webinar today. I'm going to turn things over to Jim and Layla, and I will be back for the Q&A session at the end.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. That was a very insightful session. Very helpful stuff. So up next, Lila and Jim will take us through some use cases of how IntellectSeek is seeing AI used in underwriting. Lila and Jim, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Thanks, Barb. I had to turn on my mic. Hi, everyone. I'm Lila Bean with IntellectSeek, which is the insurtech backed by Intellect Design Arena. Intellect Design Arena is publicly traded on the Bombay Stock Exchange. It's in about 29 plus countries, 250 plus customers worldwide, and an employee base of 4,000 approximately. Now, IntellectSeek originally, the strength of IntellectSeek originally is integration and business components. But in 2015, we did a ground-up design of the platform and the products to make them more cloud-native and AI ML based to handle the paradigm shift in insurance. And some of the factors that influence this paradigm shift included emerging technologies, right? Could be blockchain, mixed reality, various things. The explosion of data, and what do you do with that explosion of data? How do you make meaning out of that explosion of data? Which in turn made the regulators, get on pins and needles, and there's a ton of regulatory advancements and clarifications coming out about how do you use this data, what's allowed in a personal data versus commercial data. The tech startups that just have been coming out of the woodwork. Tons of M&A activity. Now, the key thing here with insurers is they would rely on investment gains in the past because interest rates were pretty good. But now underwriting has been the focus from shifting underwriting from being a cost center to a profit center. And so when you think about that shift, a lot of the business models have also changed. So as a company, we had to not just look at the shift in the industry, but look at the shift in technology and data and figure out a way to continuously provide value to our clients. And so when you go to the next slide, Barb, we'll show you why we are placed in a broader category for advanced underwriting, because this session today is focused on underwriting and not on claims or servicing or other areas of the business. From a commercial insurer standpoint, our feedback we've got from the market as well as from Navarica is that we have a broad set of offerings. It's not just about digital products that are AI based and a big data platform that we have, but it's also the additional transformation accelerators that we provide, which includes core technology resources. Those are full stack developers, technologists, integration specialists, and an offshore pool of data scientists that augment the insurers' staffing to enable the transformation to be much smoother, and also it is much more cost effective. There's multiple other technologies we are continuously expanding our partnerships with, for example, Snowflake. We also have a center of excellence with Salesforce and multiple others, AWS. And so as we move our data partnerships like Hazard Hub and others, along with our transformation partnerships, this broad set of offerings is what brings value to our clients. In addition, we have innovation labs, and we not just work on piloting new technologies and creating those competitive use cases, but we co-create with our clients in those innovation labs and bring out these new ideas and technologies into reality. So I'm just going to take a pause before we go into the use cases and ask Jim if he has anything to add.
Thanks, Lila. First, let me introduce myself, Jim McKenney. I've been with Intellect Seek for about 2 months. But before that, I was with a national insurance carrier, Liberty Mutual, and had a relationship with Intellect for the last 2 or 3 years. Excited to join the company. It's a broad set of capabilities. It's really a commercial insurance modernization company. I had a relationship around some solutions we're going to talk about, but since I've joined, I've really realized the breadth of capabilities, including offshore data scientists and offshore agile teams to help speed up investment. So looking forward to sharing about the solutions we're seeing with many of our customers.
Thanks, Jim. So let's get into the use cases and what we see carriers get immediate ROI and longer term strategic ROI. And Barb, if you go to the next slide, please. And I'll talk a little bit about some of these use cases and why they're looking at these. And then I'm going to let Jim give you a little more flavor coming from, the other side of the fence to the technology side. So if you look at the underwriting life cycle, right, you look at it right from the prospect lead stage all the way down to bind. And so we looked at the whole value chain and we said, okay, how does technology and data marry with all these new emerging ideas to drive value? So we kind of try to categorize it by carrier process and what are some of the solutions and augmented supplemental resources that apply in this whole transformation journey. If you look at prospecting, now every carrier and every broker that works with each carrier, they send submissions to multiple carriers. So when you think of prospecting, you need to have broker loyalty. With data, with the big data that you have, and if you contextualize them into company, location, and a person as 3 core pillars of organizing that data, and then creating insights from triangulation of multiple data sources. These are 8,000 plus data sources to give you 800 plus insights, which are relevant to specific use cases along the whole underwriting life cycle. So from a prospecting perspective, now you can do some identification of proactive markets and segments that you can go after, in addition to identifying the high bind probability of prospects and giving those particular prospects or leads to your brokers to follow up, because the brokers is more on relationship management with the accounts. And so that's where you're prospecting for high growth, prospecting for high bind, and proactively engaging your brokers so that their profitability increases as well. So the focus on some of these use cases is portfolio steering, underwriting effectiveness and efficiency, and expense reduction. So this is more about growing your portfolio in a profitable manner. The second we want to talk about is submission intake. Now, I know in the responses to one of the polls, you said, document recognition NLP is not really an area, but if you think about it, that is your quickest ROI. And some of the key areas with submission intake is brokers. And if you look at current carrier submission intake processes, the brokers submit bundles of documents. And the amount of manual touch points, the triage time that is exorbitantly high, the cost that's exorbitantly high, and the specialized skill sets you need to look at accord forms versus SOVs versus, GL class codes versus whatever. So when you look at 3 things, reducing triage time, increasing or improving the data quality of the submissions and improving the data footprint of the submissions, because brokers submit a lot of information, but only about 22 to 25% is actually risk related. A lot of it is you even ignore. And so, but then there's a lot of missing underwriting information that the underwriter needs to make a decision on. Or if it's going to SDP, you're going to need those key variables to make that decision up front. So that is where submission intake, it's not just about cognitive RPA, but this is taking cognitive RPA to a completely new level where it is, it's more like probabilistic output, and it mimics the human in vision, pattern recognition, and language and judgment calls, and it's continuous learning model, and with an ML feedback model to it. Then you go into triage, right? So when we talk about triage, you have to look at the submissions. We do submission prioritization, which is which of these submissions are going to give you the highest bind ratios, but also will give you the highest growth, right? So it's you can, and this is carrier specific. There's no one formula meets all. It depends upon your appetite, depends upon the markets you're after, large, small, commercial, everything. So underwriting insights is where you now move into, now before I go into insights, I want to talk also about the submission process and the triage, where there's another factor, another use case you can bring in, which is quick quote up front. There's a lot of times that brokers might just want to immediately identify, is this a good account or not? It may be a blind account that they got from wherever, some referral. And so we have released in Australia a 5-second quick quote with just some base parameters for the brokers to identify if that's a good risk to uptake or not and to pursue. And so that's being pulled into the US pretty soon. Now, when we go to renewal books of business, this is very interesting because a customer in the past may not be a good customer anymore because of all the socioeconomic changes that have happened. And here's where, instead of continuously monitoring data, because that becomes a high cost to you, you have to find those trigger points that could then give you signals or changes in customer portfolio that may change your coverage. So it's the right bind with the right coverage at the right time. Right? And so with underwriting insights is where you need this whole explosion of data, where you then look whether it's workers' comp or whether it's general liability or auto or property, very different sets of variables, very different sets of insights. And then you can also do some triangulation to give you some spend trends, delinquencies, things like that, that will be trigger points to say, what kind of coverage is needed in the past. For example, a restaurant is now offering delivery services, which requires a whole new level of liability. So these are just some basic use cases. Now, in the next session, we're going to walk you through how do you now operationalize some of these, and what is the ways that people are deploying some of these to give you immediate ROI, midterm ROI, and long-term ROI. And all this also has technology enablers, because without the technology, you can't scale. You cannot have high performance, which is auto scaling methods in technologies these days. And there's no way a carrier can build for such scale of data, because carriers do have point data that they collect from, it could be DNB and other sources. But the key is they then add logic to it and figure out and triangulate that data. But here, this is proven technologies with layers and layers of algorithms and triangulation accuracies that have been measured in the industry against thousands of data sources for one data element, just like a number of employees or revenue of we go to about 22 plus sources just to get you that element of truth, not just the source of truth. So I'm going to pause here, and Jim, I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about some of these use cases.
Thanks, Lila. So first off, I just wanted to add a little bit more context, right? So we have off-the-shelf products and solutions you see along the right-hand side of this slide. We have 8,000 data elements. We have clearly have AI, but a lot of these we customize for each carrier, right? Depending on what the needs are. We also have an underwriting end-to-end underwriting platform, and all of these kind of integrate together. And so a lot of our customers, kind of going back down through now that Lila's teed it up for me, prospect prioritization is really, if you think about it, we have a world of data at our fingertips, and the biggest value prop of the data set is, Lila mentioned it, the triangulation of data. So ensuring that data is accurate and verifiable, if you will. And so think about prospecting is getting third-party data before you even receive a submission in applying the predictive models on that data, and then you can help narrow in on which accounts you want to prospect. And the value prop of the broker, being able to approach them saying, I want this very specific account. Either you have it, or maybe we can, win new together, which is the ultimate, way to build relationships with brokers. So that's an example there. Submission intake is the capability of leveraging AI for data ingestion for all things commercial insurance. We have a off-the-shelf capability there, and so that's, to Jeff's earlier point, we see a ton of interest in that capability. You can get your return on investment there, and starting in 45 days. It's a quick turnaround time for that technology. And then moving down to submission prioritization, it's trying to work smarter in the funnel to really get at exactly which risks you think are more likely to win and more likely to be higher quality accounts, by bringing a little bit more third-party data in addition to what you got from the submission at this point. And a lot of times, because of the data ingestion, quick turnaround times, instead of having either offshore resources or kind of back office resources, you can even push that submission to a default kind of rating. And so, in the past, you'd send it off to get rated type of thing and then get it back, and at least in the mid-size space. And all that automation is actually making that turnaround time, so you can get a lot smarter. In some carriers, we've even had it apply to their predictive models. And so before it even hits the underwriter's desk, it's run through in a quick turnaround time through your predictive models with an indicated price, and you can quickly sift through and maybe work the accounts, work smarter on the accounts you're more likely to want to quote. And then all the way down to, obviously, at Underwriting Insight, a lot of our customers, that's where they go out and want a lot of information, right? Earlier in the funnel, you just want a few data points to, you don't want to get too much until you're really ready to quote. And then we believe, in the small commercial space, which many of you folks know, it's about portfolio underwriting, portfolio pricing. The larger end's about service. In the mid space, it's not homogenous like risk like small, nor is the past predictive of the future like large. And so we believe it's understanding your exposure better than your competitors there. And that's where all of this data, in contextualizing it of what good looks like for your underwriter at the point of underwriting. And obviously, ultimately, we're trying to get information that we can drive into our predictive models and the next best variable in the pricing. So we really try to think of technology, data, and contextualize it throughout the entire underwriting funnel. The last thing I'll talk about on the right-hand side here is those supplemental resources, which a lot of carriers are going through transformation, trying to prioritize what investments and where to start, right? With legacy platforms throughout the industry, and what I think is really interesting is we have insurance-specific offshore resources, which clearly are a lot cheaper than kind of the onshore version, that help carriers kind of supplement and transform even faster. So the combination of the data, the products off the shelf, our underwriting platform, and the supplemental resources, it's really have everything at our fingertips to help folks move fast.
Thanks, Jim. This is today was a high level on what are some of the use cases, and the way we see our clients implementing AI is some of them want to start with small data packages, which you can release in pretty much 3 days to a week. And that could be around prospecting over a very small set of, I want to just check this particular renewal business piece or whatever. Then they look into a little more of an expansion of that, like Jim mentioned, 45 days to 2 months to take in submissions of brokers, which is a massive cost and a long turnaround time. And so this is where it takes in all kinds of documents, whether it's PDFs, images, Excels. And the key with SOVs here, that's very interesting, because SOVs are some of the hardest use cases in property, simply because they're infinite versions, unlike a quote forms, which is very finite set of versions. And plus, once you extract it, then you validate it. But with SOVs, it could It could not just be extraction, but you got to convert pretext to codes. For example, when the SOV comes in, we look at occupancy description and other variables and convert that into NAICS at a location level. In addition, we look at construction descriptions written by brokers. They can be anything from one word to a whole thesis in that one cell. And we convert that into ISO codes. And so that kind of algorithms and ensuring the addresses provided by the brokers is correct. A lot of times we see cities wrong, zip codes wrong, which is key variables that are required for underwriting. And so when you augment that with peril information exposure, it could be wildfires, it could be flood, it could be whatever other pieces of information you're looking for, that's when your true value comes in, because that's all bundled in submission intake, and that improves your data quality and the data footprint for the underwriter to make the quickest decision possible. Anything you
Yeah,
want to add?
yeah, absolutely. I think, again, the data triangulation and data validation on top of, self-learning AI is really where I think we differentiate. Is we have that data capability. Not only can we ingest, but we've also built the product in a way. Many folks say the hardest thing of AI, right? All it is a kind of a prediction, and computing power is gotten faster, and so we can predict faster than we could in the past. And it's really the implementation and the user journey is something interesting. We're going to talk about it in the next webinar, but it's really powerful in that SOV, where there is some judgment going on in SOV ingestion, and so that's typically more monitored AI case than kind of a self-run AI capability that you might see in like an Accord form, because it's self-learning. You can quickly make corrections on the fly if it's monitored, but SOV we see in practice it's much more monitored, and so you have to make that shift from being a data processor to now an exception handler, right? And so that's a pretty big change. We'll talk a lot more about that in the next webinar.
Right. Thanks, Jim. And Jim just touched upon supervised learning versus unsupervised learning, which is the key differentiators in certain of these ML models. And you cannot go to unsupervised learning in every use case. You just cannot, because there's so many conflicting opinions. There's a bunch of other judgment calls that are being made, a bunch of assumptions being done. And so that requires a little more of a stringent approach, going to supervised first and then going into an unsupervised manner. So for today, I think I'm already getting the notice from Barb saying that I'm out of time. So but for today we're going to stop here, and then any questions, we will continue this discussion and show you more in-depth discussion on deployment options and what are some of the things you're seeing in the industry in the next session. So Barb, I'll stop here for now.
Sure. Do we want to launch our last question so we can kind of gauge the interest for next time?
Yes, so we have a couple of poll questions that we will roll one after the other, and this may help us set up what do we need to talk more about in the next session. So the first one is how you're progressing with the applicable AI investment. So I know a lot of you said, yes, you're in pilot, 100% said so. Question here is, are you hitting roadblocks? Are you not seeing ROI? Or are you seeing some ROI and on the way to the projected ROI? Interested in your responses. So that was quick. So I'm assuming we'll see the results. Didn't see the ROI expected. Interesting. Okay, very good. So we will make sure that we talk a little bit more about how to get that ROI in the next session. And we have one more poll question that'll also tee up for the next session. What is the biggest pain point? Because we know there's a lot of challenges in implementing AI initiatives. They're very different thought process. And so is it regarding the culture of the organization, existing legacy ecosystem, don't know where to start or even how to start, not sure how to quantify the benefits? This is where the business case comes in. Or is it all of the above? So the answer is quite interesting. Culture, yes. We see, yes, I completely agree with that. 50% don't know how to start, agree with that, not sure of the benefits. That's the business case. And we have helped our clients create that business case too. Now, it's very interesting that no one talked about integration, because we seem to, even when we have done these AI initiatives, you have to push that data, or it's a push-pull, right? So you have to integrate to your legacy systems. So it's interesting that no one has, it's a 0% there, or maybe you have just not gotten to that point. I'm not sure. Jim, any comments here?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think it gives us something to build off of for the next webinar. Certainly is about how to truly get the benefit and what it takes to do that. We certainly don't drop our solutions and run. We certainly partner with our customers to push those things to benefit. And it's while the technology can be stood up quickly or the data can be brought quickly, it's that mindset shift. And excited to talk about that at the next webinar.
Yeah,
and if I could add, one thing I'll say about culture is that's not an AI specific issue. Anytime we work with insurers on data strategy in general, becoming a more data-driven organization it's a technological challenge, right? There's lots of old data. There's lots of data isn't clean. You don't have data governance, but it's the culture. It's shifting an organization to be a data first organization is very difficult, and AI is really part of that journey to saying, how do we leverage data? How do we use data to make better decisions, to do things the right way?
Absolutely. And Jeff, I'm pretty sure we'll have some pretty detailed discussion in the next webinar on these specific points. Thank you. Thanks.
Yes.
So over to you, Barb.
Sure. Thanks, Lila and Jim. That was great. And as always, it's good to see how commercial lines carriers are using AI in their everyday operations, because that really lends validity to the benefits of implementing the technology. So we do have some questions though, so let's get started. And if you have a question that you'd want to ask, it's not too late to enter it into the portal, but why don't we start with some of the ones that are already there. So the first question is how can insurers hire AI talent or train people on the latest AI skill sets? Maybe all three of you can probably elaborate on this since you see it from different angles.
Sure. Yeah. Yes, it is not easy, right? You're creating a funnel of technology talent, right? When you start where there's and to hire AI talent, you are competing with Google and Facebook and Microsoft and startups in Silicon Valley, and it's also, I think, not as easy to train. It's not like taking someone who understands Java and training them on .NET, or it's more than just a language shift. It is a very different mathematical, scientific space. So no, okay. So first half, yes, it is difficult to do that. You can, and I do actually think there's value in getting people in your own organization to start building these skills, even if they're not going to be the people who drive the AI projects, just understanding how it works. I do think this is why insurers are generally working with third parties for AI initiatives, unless they're the size or scope to truly hire and build out teams. But even if you're, leveraging IntellectSeek solutions or working with a consultant to build out some, AI models for you, I still think it is important to make sure you understand what's going on, right? What does AI really mean? Can you build some basic skill sets just so you get, even if you're not the ones driving the projects, you understand what these projects really take. It's not just looking at a black box. It's also trying to make it, maybe, let's say, partially transparent box.
Yeah, I'll jump in there too. I'd say you go on any insurer's open job listing, the number one thing you'll see is data scientists these days. They're hard to find. They're really, really expensive, but it's critical. I mean, if even small carriers are investing in some of their own capability, because eventually it's the name of the game, and if you get left behind there, there certainly will be adverse selection, and that's why I was so impressed that Intellect Design has had the foresight to actually build out a group offshore resources, right? So again, you get that arbitrage, and their insurance specific capabilities. So it's an interesting offering we have.
So I just want to add another perspective to that is when you talk about skill sets and carriers upskilling, um, how are you going to do that on a continuous basis, right? Because emerging technologies also require specific skill sets like blockchain or mixed reality apps or any new emerging technology. And then so skill sets is one thing. The other thing is the skill sets, I think, from a carrier would be much more effective if they could manage AI partners so they understand how to transition the company from a technology perspective from current state to the future state. The other piece of it is more like the platform and the technology itself, right? Because everything is going to change. And with the platform, the cost of continuously enhancing your platform as a carrier is enormous. So, and also ensuring that there's new data types that could be consumed by that platform as they come out, new technologies that should be integratable to that platform and utilized by that platform as they come out. There's multiple variables from a cost perspective and a maintainability perspective for carriers to think about, not just the skill sets.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, we tend to go through this with all emerging technologies where early adopters build out a internal capability to deliver something. Then the next wave work with consultants, and then the next wave there's packaged solutions that really do this for them and are already purpose built for the insurance use case. That doesn't necessarily mean you lose the skills that you get on sort of the core of the underlying technology because those are still valuable. But it's there's always been a you buy what's available and build if it's a competitive differentiator for you.
Okay, thank you. The next question is about strategy. So the question is does an AI strategy require an investment in cloud computing as well? I know we've touched on some of this in our technology stack. Lila?
Sure. I can give my view, and then Jeff, you can jump in. So so cloud computing, right? The shift in capability of platforms and the performance of the platforms is massive from just even 10 years ago. So if you look at, I would suggest like not investing in platforms like that because those are available at a low cost right now. It's platform as a service, right? PaaS. And so if you look at these industry platforms and even that's why our cloud is AWS. And we have partners like Snowflake. Think about the cost benefits you get and the speed to release anything with technologies like this is enormous. And this will be a very good question actually for the next webinar where we say deployment strategies and we talk a little bit about the technology and how you can not just get performance but scalability and reliability. So those are the three core pillars that we look at when you talk about cloud computing. Jeff?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you said it great. Here's the thing I will add is I had that slide about how different emerging technologies emerge together, right? And I focused on big data and IoT and AI, but cloud's another one, right? It's where the reality is this kind of stuff was inaccessible to most companies because the cost of servers was so high, right? To build out the capacity to manage massive data sets in your on-prem data center was just not accessible. And now because of cloud computing, it is. And I think this ties into something else. The thing about cloud computing is you can shift to a OpEx model instead of a CapEx model, meaning you don't spend all the money at once, you pay for what you're using. And that's especially important in an area like this where we've been discussing, and actually one of the poll questions showed this, that ROI is still kind of being figured out, right? ROI is not always clear. You're investing in something where it's not 100% sure that it'll deliver significant change to the organization. We all kind of think it will, right? And in my slides, I was talking about using these levers to sort of anticipate and understand in advance what you're trying to do. But the reality is, with any emerging technology, the ROI isn't clear, and that makes it hard to make massive investments in something before you know the ROI, right? And cloud computing has definitely allowed us to do that because you can try something. It's still very expensive, right? You're putting a lot of time and money into it, but you don't have to go out and buy 20 servers in order to build an AI machine learning cloud server farm in your own data center before you even know if it's going to work.
Exactly. And the techniques nowadays are so advanced of how do you
Yes.
like the data warehouse techniques, like they're so advanced that it's more about the deltas and for
Yeah.
highest performance versus, the whole backups that you used to do like even 10 years ago. So it's a
Yeah.
very different world we live in. Jim, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, first of all, it's a great question, right? And I mentioned earlier that we've had the ability to do predictions for a long time. What's caused AI to take off is the cost of computing is so much cheaper than it ever was before, and the accessibility, right? And so you can spin up pretty quickly, AI on the cloud. A lot of folks do it, a lot of prepackaged capabilities like we have at Intellect, but it's definitely the spike and rise in AI is directly fueled by the cloud computing capability, no question. And
Yeah.
even that continues to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just talking to somebody about what if scenario modeling in the rating space, which isn't even machine learning or AI. It's more like what if scenario mining kind of becomes AI if you run it over and over and over again, and the machine is kind of interpreting it and making adjustments. But even just running a rate change across the book of business used to be out of like you couldn't do it, right? Only a big insurer with a big data center you could do that over the course of a week, right? I mean, and this isn't that long ago that I used to talk about insurers running what if scenarios for a rate change, and it would take them a week of processing to do it. And now, because of and so now you think, okay, that's literally just like one slice of a machine learning calculation, right? Machine learning calculation is kind of like the integral calculus of one of those run repeatedly, until you really build the knowledge. And that's I just it starts to become out of scope unless all of these different technologies, all the technologies from the cloud, that emerging tech report are all kind of in sync together.
Great, thank you. Okay, we are unfortunately coming up on our 1 hour mark. Thank you all for presenting and offering your time today. This was great. And as always, it's good to see how commercial line carriers, actually, I made a mistake. Thank you for joining us. If you have additional questions or if you would like to learn more about AI and our underwriting, then you can reach out to Jim, Lila, or Jeff directly. Their contact information is right there on the screen. If you signed up for both webinars when you registered, you will receive an email in a few days with the link to part 2, and that session is planned for March 11th at 1 p.m. If you haven't signed up for that session, then you can visit intellectseek.com and get registered. So thank you so much. Thanks, Jim, Lila, and Jeff. I appreciate your time. We all do. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.